What is going on, everyone? My name is Niraj, and welcome to my series Unseen, which is part of the Forgotten Generation podcast. In this series, we'll be focusing on the topic of invisible disabilities and discuss lived experiences of individuals that have an invisible disability. As a disclaimer, whilst me and my guests will be touching on personal topics, we are not experts and are only speaking from our lived experiences, and everyone will have different lived experiences. What is going on, everyone? My name is Niraj, and welcome to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Clark, and she's going to talk about her experience with fibromyalgia. It's an invisible disability that I don't know much about, but it is something that, as I've kind of spoken to other people with it, it is something that I have learned a bit more about, and I'm sure Clark will give some really useful insights about her lived experiences with it and how potentially you can support people better that have fibromyalgia. So, hi Clark, how are you?
Hi, Niraj. I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
You're in the US, how's the weather there? It's lovely here, the weather.
Same here. It's like in the 70s. It's beautiful out.
In the 70s, Fahrenheit.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Fahrenheit.
I wonder, 70 degrees Celsius, that would
Like
be very
burning.
hard to, yeah, not even
Yeah.
possible to live in. But thanks for, taking the time to, kind of be part of this podcast episode. So, I just want to, if you want to kind of introduce yourself, share a bit about your experience with fibromyalgia.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Clark. I have a couple of diagnoses, but fibromyalgia is what we're focusing on today. And it is a widespread chronic pain condition that is very, very much common and is also very disputed as a real diagnosis in the medical community. So it's definitely an interesting topic to talk about on a podcast.
Okay, so you said it's kind of disputed as a medical diagnosis. Is that something which is around the world, or is it just in the US, or?
That's a good question. I personally think it's because about 90% of the people who are diagnosed with it are women. And I think that women's healthcare is not always taken seriously. And I think that's worldwide.
Okay, no, fair enough. In terms of your diagnosis with fibromyalgia, like, what was your journey like to getting the diagnosis? When did you first noticing symptoms, and when was it that you started thinking about, getting a potential diagnosis?
So, a lot of my diagnoses, including fibromyalgia, I started seeking out when I was 19. I grew up in a family that didn't really take health conditions seriously. My parents were the kind of people that, like, unless you were profusely bleeding, you were not going to the doctor. So, unfortunately, neither of those things were happening to me, which meant that I did not go to see a doctor until I was 19 and moved out of the house. So, I went into the doctor because I had always had a lot of really bad chronic pain. So, the hallmark symptoms of fibromyalgia are chronic fatigue and widespread muscle pain, as well as, I think they're side effects, but they list them under the symptoms, which is depression and feeling like stressed a lot of the time. So, I couldn't really figure out what was happening. So, I went to my primary care doctor and was like, hey, I don't think I've ever had a day in my life where I wasn't experiencing horrible pain. And they were like, ha, that sounds like something you should see a real doctor about.
So when you were obviously in that journey to, like, you spoke to the doctor, I don't think was it at the time you were pinning it specifically down to fibromyalgia, or was it you were still unsure in the moment what it was?
For a lot of chronic pain conditions, you have to see a rheumatologist, which is a specialist. So I figured my primary care doctor would either say, nope, nothing's going on, or they would refer me to a rheumatologist.
Okay, and in terms of the diagnosis itself, who was responsible for giving you that diagnosis? Because obviously you got referred from the doctor.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I ended up going to the specialist, the rheumatologist, and fibromyalgia is disputed in the medical community because A, it is a diagnosis primarily given to women, but also because it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So when I went to the rheumatologist, instead of like doing tests to, be like, oh, you have high inflammation markers, it's arthritis, you have autoimmune markers, it's lupus, you essentially go through every single medical test, including things like ultrasounds, blood tests, CTs. And after all of that, they then just start poking you, like literally poking you. And if you say yes to like 11 of these specific pain points, they diagnose you with fibromyalgia. So you essentially have to rule out every single other thing, and then they just poke you and go, yeah.
Fine. So I guess it's criteria based. It's like when you get diagnosed with autism, there's this DSM criteria, at least in the UK, so it's similar to that. Obviously, you've talked a bit about the symptoms that come with fibromyalgia. Like, how do they show up in daily life? So, for example, when you think about navigating everyday life, like we all do, how does it show up?
It's a chronic pain condition, so I'm in pain every day. A lot of it is leg pain and extremity pain, so I function as a normal person in society and I go to work and things like that. So I have learned to use things like mobility aids, like I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, and that helps a lot so that I can do daily activities more often.
Good point. So you say it's more like physical symptoms.
I think with a lot of chronic conditions, the mental side is also important in the sense that, when you're in pain every day and don't really want to get out of bed, but yeah, mostly physical.
No, I was going to actually, no, it's good that you touched on that. I was just about to kind of follow up on that because obviously with chronic conditions like fibromyalgia, maybe chronic fatigue, things like that, obviously the pain and fatigue, it's quite obvious it impacts you physically. Like that's easier for people to get their head around. I guess how would you say it impacts you emotionally on a day-to-day basis? Like, can you talk about the well-being side of things? How does fibromyalgia impact you in like, yeah, in an emotional way?
I struggle a lot with depression because it is really frustrating to wake up and almost every day, daily, have to grapple with the fact that my body is not what I want it to be. And especially with, like, I'm 24 now, and that's still pretty young, and I get that, but it's really weird to kind of feel like my body is crumbling at the age that I am. And so that's a lot of what I deal with, but I also try to use the mantra that nobody has ever had an original experience. So I know that other people are struggling mentally, physically, and they are doing fine. So I'm doing fine.
What I like about this, how you said everyone's got their individual experiences, and I think that feeds through to like everyone has their own kind of silent battles, which no one knows about. So I think when it comes to people's lived experiences, it is just everyone's lived experience is so diverse and unique, and it's impossible to kind of compare yourself to the next person because they might be going through things you just would not know about. So yeah, I think that's it's really good how you see it. Like you just try to it's present, but you just try to go about navigating everyday life as best as possible. And yeah, something that obviously fibromyalgia isn't something that I've got loads of knowledge on. I don't have lived experience of it. What do you think are the things that people, when you, let's say, mention fibromyalgia, is there things that are like often misunderstood?
There's a lot of things that are misunderstood about it. I think that the way that it's treated and the way that it's diagnosed give people a lot of misconceptions about it. So like I said, the medical community is like, I don't know that it's real because you can't like just run a single test and be like, oh, it's that. You have to do all of these other things and rule it out. And then with just my peers, family members, people in the world, they may misunderstand it because of the way that it's treated. So there are a couple different options to treat it, but one of them is like an antidepressant or gabapentin, which is like a nerve block medication. And in the US, we have medication commercials. So when people think of fibromyalgia, they think of probably a very funny, like, get Lyrica today and it'll help your fibromyalgia, make all your pain go away. And I think that makes people think of it a little differently to be like, oh, what are you on for your pain? And you're like, oh, an antidepressant. And they're like, got it. It's in your brain.
Right, okay, so that's interesting. So it's when you mention the word antidepressants, it's something that relates to the brain rather than something which is more like physical symptoms. And also people think like, oh yeah, if you just take this, your fibromyalgia will be treated. And it's like, it's probably frustrating for you because like it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's the same with a lot of chronic conditions. I mean, people are kind of like that, I think, with autism as well. Yeah.
I think autism impacts everyone differently. Like you know,
Yes.
obviously I'm not sure what people really classify as chronic conditions. I think it's kind of people might classify things differently. In terms of, we've talked about obviously your symptoms, where things have kind of been a bit challenging, how it kind of impacts you physically and emotionally. What are like coping strategies that you go to in terms of not only, well, kind of think about it two ways. One, to manage your symptoms, but also to still be able to thrive, do the amazing things that, you're doing at the moment. Just if you think about it from those two angles, like what sort of coping strategies have helped you?
Well, I mean, in the physical sense, I use mobility aids. That is something that allows me to live my life to the fullest. It's amazing. And I always try to get the flashiest ones, the cutest ones, because I figure if people are going to stare at me, I might as well say it's because I'm fashionable. But in like a more like emotional coping sense, I do a lot of, I don't know, people might say it's like woo woo, but like nervous system work and doing like breathing exercises and like through therapy, different exercises to like thank my body for what it's able to do so that I have a more positive outlook on my disability and chronic pain in general. And that's been super helpful to not really get stuck in that kind of mental slump.
I think that's good. So you talked about kind of exercise for like the nervous. Is that similar to yoga, or is it completely different?
It definitely has some yoga practices in it. A lot of it is like deep breathing and like, yeah, meditation. So a little bit similar to yoga.
Okay, no, fine. Like, yeah, I know quite a few people that do yoga. It's quite hard. I did it in Sri Lanka. One of them was for 2 hours, and I struggled with yoga when I did it in Sri Lanka. I think that's kind of helpful in terms of obviously managing your emotional and kind of physical symptoms of fibromyalgia. To kind of add on to that, like maybe a bit separate from fibromyalgia, but not necessarily separate. But obviously, I've seen that you do your own podcast. It's absolutely brilliant. I highly recommend you listen to some of the episodes in Clark's podcast, but also just the things that you're doing, like your advocacy work, the different things that enable you to not just survive every day, but like actually thrive. Like what helps you, you know, thrive in the way that you're doing at the moment.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. I do have a podcast. I really enjoy the podcast, and it's been amazing to actually get to connect with real people and be like, hey, are you trying this thing? Or let them reach out. Like, I posted something about being a little bit burnt out, and I had so many people flood my messages with, like, hey, I totally understand, or like, let me know if you need anything. Like, it's a beautiful community, and that's been so helpful for managing this condition and thriving as a person because life is hard.
No, I mean, I love that. And I think it's when it comes to thriving in life, it's not just obviously with fibromyalgia or neurodiversity or DNI or just disabilities or invisible disabilities in general. Like, I think just generally, like, when it comes to thriving, like, as you touched on, like, community, the people around you is just so important, the support system you have. And I think with my own journey, my support system has been a integral part of that. And it's really good to see that what helps you thrive is having that interaction with the people around you. So that's really good to see. You talked about it's kind of so often misunderstood, fibromyalgia, because people think that it links to the brain, or people think that you can just easily treat it, where, it's not as easy as that. And I think another thing about fibromyalgia is it can be an invisible disability sometimes. And it's also, I guess, quite fluctuating. Like let's say today you might be able to do absolutely everything, but next week, maybe in the same environment, you might not be able to do everything. You might be able to do very little things. And I think that's kind of quite hard for people to get their head around because they might like, oh, you were fine last week. This week, you seem fine again. Like, what's changed? And I guess the question is obviously when it's invisible, it's fluctuating, it's not always the easiest to understand, it can be misunderstood. How do you go about explaining fibromyalgia to others? For example, maybe your family or people in the workplace or just generally?
I mean, like you said, it is a dynamic disability, so it is harder for people to understand. Um, I explain it. I like to try to explain things like I'm explaining it to a child sometimes because it, I think, helps people grasp and go around the misconceptions they may have. Perhaps I'm talking down to them and I don't know, but no one's ever told me I am, so I think I'm good. I like to say that the nerve like endings in my brain, like my nerve receptors, they they never shut down. So when you bump your funny bone on something and you go, holy guacamole, that hurts so bad, and then it goes away, like that doesn't happen to my body or my brain. Like my nerve receptors kind of got stuck with the on switch on. And so my body constantly feels like I have a sunburn all the time or that my joints ache all the time. And people seem to understand that. I've also explained it like the day after leg day at the gym. People who are like workout people really get that. They're like, oh my gosh, every day? And I go, yeah, my legs feel like that every day.
No, I think that's actually really good. What you're saying is, in a way, you make it relatable. So let's say you're talking to someone who's into fitness. You're like, oh, you know how leg day is like after the gym? And they're like, yeah, it's painful. That's fibromyalgia. And I think, yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. And also, I think something that you spoke about, which is quite interesting, is you explain it as if you were explaining it to a child. So you're not making assumptions on what they know and what they don't know. You're being like, okay, I'm not going to assume prior knowledge, and that's okay, but I'm just going to explain this is what it is and this is how it impacts me. Would you say that's correct? That actually explaining it like as if you were explaining it to a child means that you don't make assumptions on what they do and they don't know. Is that correct?
It's like they just woke up in the world. So I'm going to tell you what's going on.
Yeah. I see it as you're just trying to help them understand how it impacts you because I think when it comes to like getting support and getting accommodations, it's really important for people to know how it impacts you and also understand how it impacts you. So do you feel that when you're communicating your condition to others, what you're trying to get across is for them to understand not just, okay, what is fibromyalgia, because someone can just Google that, but actually how it impacts you and your lived experiences? Is that what you focus on more?
I think it kind of depends. A lot of people in my life, they see me as a dynamic disability, so oftentimes I'm not using a mobility aid. I would rather push through the pain and ruin my life on a different day than admit that I need help. So I often just explain what fibromyalgia is, usually when I'm using a mobility aid. So I'll say that, hey, this is what I have, and that I'm in pain every day, but I just needed a little more help today. And that's kind of how I explain it.
Okay. So it's kind of, I guess it's explaining also why you're using a mobility aid, what's the purpose, what's the benefit of it, why people use it.
They assume I like broke a leg or something, and I'm like, nah, I'm good.
I think that would be really useful when it comes to explaining your condition to others. It's just that focus on, this is how it impacts me. I use this as one of my coping strategies, and this is why I use it. And I think that's, for someone, let's say, who maybe doesn't know much about fibromyalgia, but wants to support, that's really helpful. I think that will definitely help you get your needs met and also for others to accommodate your needs. So I think that's, really useful. Following on from that topic of what we talked about how you get supported, how you communicate it, in terms of other people, what kind of support and responses have helped you the most? So, and let's say another way to think about this, if someone asks you, how can I best support you? What would help you the most? What would you say helps you the most, or what support helps you the most?
As like a blanket response, I think you should always ask the people in your life that question because it's going to vary from person to person. But for me, I go about it in kind of maybe a weird way of telling them kind of how I respond to pain or how I look when I'm in pain, but I'm maybe not using a mobility aid so that they can be more aware of what maybe my baseline or flare level pain is. So it's like, hey, if you see that I'm maybe using a stress toy or I start talking a little slower than normal, I'm probably having a bit of a bad pain flare. And the way that you can help me is just by maybe giving me some grace or maybe helping clear the way if we're like out and about doing something and I didn't think to bring a mobility aid because I thought I was fine, then their help in kind of being both a emotional and physical person to lean on is great.
Right. So I think so in terms of what you're saying and what helps you the best is just people that give you grace, understand that, there are things that you might find challenging and then obviously just be supportive with that, but also I guess be someone that essentially is that safe space emotionally and physically that that, okay, this person's a safe person that I can lean on. In terms of what support or responses how like is the most helpful for you, it's the ones that make it very clear that they are a safe space, that provide that safe space for you.
Yeah, I also really enjoy having friends that maybe are a little more spicy, a little more outspoken than I am. In like a I don't know if you have this, but like guard dog friends, if that makes sense. Like maybe I won't say something to someone, but they will. Like I've gone to the airport before and done the pre-boarding and I had a lady behind me start talking about how young people just do whatever they want these days and they don't actually need to pre-board and they don't actually have a disability. And my brother turned around and just ripped into her about invisible disabilities. And I was standing there with my big headphones on and my cane in my hand going, like smiling because like I don't have the energy sometimes to do that. And sometimes you really need someone to do that for you.
That does make sense. It's almost like people that can be an advocate for you when you don't necessarily have the energy to advocate for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's something that's quite easily overlooked because there's a lot of advice, a lot of people can say, oh, it's important to advocate for yourself. Like, but I think it's also like when you have just any, let's say, challenges that you are facing on a day-to-day basis, or just with anyone that have those, as we talked about at the start, those silent battles that they're going through, it's not always easy to have the energy to accommodate for yourself. And people that can advocate for you when you might not have the energy, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And for those friends, they have a good understanding of what your needs are and where you might need support, or they know you well to be like, right, I know Clark needs this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't just go out swinging for things that you don't know about.
No, definitely. You don't want to make assumptions on what you think someone might need because, oh, most people with that same diagnosis have that. A good example is a good number of neurodivergent individuals like working from home. That does not work for me at all. So that's an example of where you should not make assumptions.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But yeah, you've talked quite positively about how, you have those friends that can provide that safe space, that can also advocate on your behalf, where you might not always have the energy to advocate for yourself. In terms of obviously just the symptoms that come with fibromyalgia and the physical and emotional challenges, would you say it's been extra challenging maintaining friendships or relationships, or do you think it hasn't really had a material impact on maintaining friendships or relationships?
I think it definitely impacts the way that I have friendships and as I have gotten older, I think it's the same with everyone, but like you said, especially with invisible disabilities, your friendships change and you find people who fit better in your life. And that is super apparent with fibromyalgia because it's like sometimes I make plans and day of, I'm like, hey, I am not doing well. And it's not that I don't like or love you as my friend. I can't get out of bed today. And finding friends who will either respond positively and be like, absolutely, no problem, like, let's reschedule, or friends that are like, heck yeah, I'll show up to your house with some chips and dip and we can just hang out in bed together. And I'm like, yes, that is the kind of friendship I need, but I've lost friends for those same reasons.
No, I think for that specific example, when it, let's say, like last minute cancellations of plans, there might be some people who really would find that hard to, deal with because it's obviously a change in their routine. They have to move things around. They mentally prepared and are looking forward to meeting up with you. And I think, there's nothing wrong with that either. Like I know with some people, I can literally be, let's say we have a call scheduled, and I can be like 2 hours before I'm like, I'm swamped with work. I can't make this call. And I know they'll be fine with it. Whereas with other people, if it's that last minute, they can get quite stressed with it. And I think there's nothing wrong. It's not a negative reflection on them as people or
Mm-hmm.
as you as a person. I think what it links to is that issue, that thing about compatibility. Like for you, it's important because obviously, your fibromyalgia is something that you don't know how it's going to show up on the day. It's important to have those friends that can be quite flexible, sometimes at short notice.
Yeah, I like what you said, compatibility. That's a really good way to explain it.
Yeah, just because people can't meet those needs of being flexible doesn't mean that they're bad people. It's just that maybe they're just different. They're not the sort of friends that you need, or they
Mm-hmm.
can't be the friend that you need them to be.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
I think it's been quite useful and really insightful hearing your experiences about fibromyalgia, how it impacts you, and also I think it's really good that we touched upon what helps you not only to just get through on a day-to-day basis, but also to be able to thrive. So kind of as a more of a closing question is, let's say someone is newly diagnosed with fibromyalgia and they're trying to communicate it with people, but they're struggling to get people to take it seriously. What advice would you give in that situation?
Ooh, that is a good question. And I wish I knew. No, I'm just kidding. I think being newly diagnosed is always very scary, and you're trying to figure it out for yourself and figure out how it looks for you. But like I said, with fibromyalgia, people have a lot of misconceptions, and they also may not believe that your body has changed so much and that you are in chronic pain because it is an invisible disability. So I think, like I said previously, explaining it to them like they've never heard of anything before is really helpful, and understanding that people's misconceptions don't make them who they are. So you're allowed to be like, hey, I have this chronic pain condition, and they may not believe you, but you can still tell them, hey, this is what an invisible disability is. I'm going to need help sometimes. And honestly, sometimes with my family members, I've had to be like, do you want to see like my medical reports or do you want to see my symptom tracking app? Like, this is what I deal with on a daily basis. But yeah, I feel like we covered it a lot in the episode. Being newly diagnosed is scary, but finding a good community and people who will understand when you tell them about it is really important.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of getting people to understand it, I think as we touched upon are two things: what it is, i.e., what is fibromyalgia, what is an invisible disability, and applying it to this is how it impacts me. It's kind of a two-step process to communicate it.
Yeah.
No, I think
Yeah.
that's really useful because from my own lived experiences, and again, people, I will caveat right now, people will have different lived experiences. For me, it's not actually that important that people know that much about autism. I don't think it's that much of a big deal for me to get supported. But what is more important is people understand how the challenges I face, kind of where I might need support, where it impacts me. Because again, I think as we talked about before, someone can Google what is fibromyalgia or what is autism. That's not hard. It's understanding how it impacts the person.
Hmm.
And I think also secondly, like when you talk about how it impacts the person, how it impacts, let's say you in when you talk about it to other people, it's not necessarily always feeling like you have to talk about the challenges. You can also kind of talk about actually this is what I'm really good at. These are the strengths that I've gained because of it and I can leverage. So I think that's definitely, at least from my experiences, what's helped me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, personal experience, I think, makes people connect with you better and understand your experience better by being like, this is my experience, not just this is the experience of fibromyalgia or autism.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think I did a podcast recording earlier on today, and actually even the other person said, what I'm speaking about, this is just my lived experience. This does not represent the whole community. And I think
Hmm.
it's just important, one, as the person with the diagnosis to acknowledge that, but also other people who want to support you to acknowledge that as well. So it's
Hmm.
that two-way thing. Clark, thank you for your time. It's been really useful and really insightful talking about fibromyalgia, an invisible disability and a diagnosis which can be sometimes a bit under the radar, but it's something that impacts a lot of people. So yeah, thank you for your time. And how can people, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I also have a podcast. It's called Chronically the Sickest. You can find me on all platforms at Chronically the Sickest Podcast. I love chatting and being silly, so feel free to reach out.
When I publish this episode, I will put a link to all of that so people can easily find you. But yeah, thank
Awesome.
you again for your time, and I hope you enjoy the lovely weather. Please support this podcast by subscribing and giving your feedback. I would love to hear your thoughts and always happy to discuss further. To get in contact, you can find me on Instagram on Niraj/travels.